This PowerPoint presentation is intended to summarize some of the key ideas presented in your first Getting Started PowerPoint lecture. It will be shorter, and with the key definitions now considered, the goal here is to establish some additional foundations for our study of American environmental literature in relation to larger historical. This slide is devoted to a simple concept with many complex dimensions. Narrative. Basically, a narrative is an account of events within a particular time frame, a beginning and an end. Within those points we have a timeline, a story, an account, a sequence of events in which something happens. In this way, narrative becomes an organizing principle for our understanding not only of our own life experiences, but also for other stories, histories, events, time frames, etc. Each of us, for example, can and does tell a story with a clear beginning and an end about some part of our lives, what we did this morning, how a particular teacher shaped our lives, what happened on a memorable vacation, etc. There are an endless number of narrative patterns that one might note in environmental literature, but there are recurring patterns within stories and accounts that we recognize over time. How and why we should save something, that's a big one obviously. Accounting for our loss of a treasured landscape or land animal, that's another one, depressing one at that. More affirming, we might find interest and even wonder in looking at something from afar or up close, or simply marveling at its beauty and complexity. We might also notice hints of something bigger, something even supernatural in our marvels about the natural world. There are plenty of other stories to be told, but these are some of the more common and more recognizable narrative patterns that you'll notice over the course of the term. Throughout history and continuing into modern American society, what we think of as environmental literature combines a full field of recognizable disciplines and categories. I've listed some here, and as we make our way through the semester we will encounter ideas that belong to the realms of religion, politics, science, history and art history, geography, medicine, ethnic and gender studies, and literature of exploration and travel. The environmental writer's concerns might hint at or engage directly with any one or more of these categories of knowledge and study. Keeping in mind the point made earlier that environmental writing really has no history, yes, you've seen this slide before, we should also know that the idea of American environmentalism is largely a creation that emerged in the post-World War II era. Even so, it is also worthwhile to realize that our thinking about the environment is also shaped by earlier and more distant eras and time periods, within which people also sought to understand their own relationship to the environment. Even as our own thinking about the environment might be shaped by a concern about the health and immediate condition of the world around us, we also want to understand how our own modern ideas of environmentalism and environmental literature are shaped by and reflected in beliefs and patterns of thinking from earlier times. Finally, although environmental writing has no history, we do see how environmental themes emerge in different historical periods. We might see them in descriptions of landscape or inherited myths and folklore, or in travel and exploration literature, or perhaps in various catalogs and lists that depict known plants and animals, or perhaps in myths that comment on local landscapes and topography, or in stories from various cultures, including our own, which depict the formation of the world's landscapes that humans inhabit. Finally, we might see environmental writing in literature that seeks to maintain a specific landscape and/or a way of life, or argues against a violent or destructive behavior within or toward a given landscape. So, with these fundamental premises of the class established, we now turn to the writers themselves to see how they explore the relationship between humans and nature, or between humankind and our many environments. So as the page turns from our first week to our second, let's take a quick look at some early writers and works from history that shaped the character of American environmental writing. Thank you for listening.